Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis talking all about Northern football, contextualizing, celebrating, discussing, analyzing the best teams in Northern football. 28 teams we claim as our own, and we talk about them every Monday here on Kings of the North. We're so glad that you guys are with us. We always start with the Frantic 14. That's 7 topics, 2 minutes each. This week, we're going to rank the best Northern teams, but then we're going to talk about their flaws. Where are these good teams vulnerable? We're going to rank not the best players this week, but the best receivers, which is, there are a lot of the best players, Landis, but we wanted to really focus on that. Marvin Harrison Jr. had a big week for Ohio State last week. There's some other really good receivers in the North this year. We'll go behind enemy lines and talk about how the South is puffed up. Not that great. Brian Ferentz Survivor Show, as always, and then a major look ahead at the end, because guess what? The biggest game of the college football season to date. No offense to Florida State LSU. No, take offense. Alabama, Texas, take offense. Oregon, Washington is this week. It's gigantic. We're really going to dive into that. But first, the Frantic 14. Here we go. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis on Kings of the North. First up, the North is dominating the rest of the regular season, Landis. There are 11 undefeated teams in the Power 69, 6th in the South, Louisville, Florida State, North Carolina, Oklahoma, USC, and Georgia, 5 in the North. The only times any of those teams, and the 5 North teams, people should know them, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, Washington. The games left between those teams are a round robin in the Big Ten East with Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and a round robin in the Pac-12, Washington, Oregon, USC. Those are the 6 big. Now, they're not all going to stay undefeated because they're going to beat each other. But those are the 6 biggest games left this regular season. Georgia doesn't play anybody the rest of the year. North Carolina and Florida State and Louisville, all in the ACC, they don't play each other. Oklahoma just beat Texas. They played there's nobody else in the Big 12. I just want people to know, if you're not paying attention to Northern football, pay attention. If you're late, fine. But you got to get in now. The sport is all about the North in the last half of the regular season, is it not?
It certainly is. People need to jump on board. I'm excited that it is. The thing that I hope is, like, we treat it as such, right? That's what we're here for. I hope college football at large does, right? I want to see Fox and I want to see ESPN like blowing this out. I want to see game day and big noon kickoff, like telling people that they need to be looking upward, north, for the biggest games remaining on the college football season. Stop with the southern glance. This is where the big boys are playing ball, up here.
Look up. I like it. They made a movie about that, but I think it was about climate change. This is just look up for football. I like to think of T-shirt slogans. That might be one of them. So we get ready this week, Oregon at Washington. Next week, Penn State at Ohio State. November 4th, Washington at USC. November 11th, 2 big ones, Michigan at Penn State and USC at Oregon. And then, of course, last week in the regular season, Ohio State at Michigan. 6 games. You're going to hear about them a lot here, but tell your friends, get locked in for Northern football. Frantic topic number 2. USC's defense stinks, Landis, and you want to make sure the North lets everybody know.
They have to do something about it. I'm tired of these guys. Get them out of my face. Like, I'm sick of watching Alex Grinch try to coordinate a defense and have people try to convince us that USC is worth talking about in the national conversation when their defense is atrocious. They're number 112 in the country in total defense. They're 86 in the country in defensive efficiency, and someone needs to make them pay for it. And those someones now remaining on USC schedule are largely of the North. Like, one game we didn't have on that list, Doug, is Notre Dame versus USC this week. Like, they get the first crack at it. It's Notre Dame. Utah gets them. Maybe Utah's not the best, candidate to do that. We'll see. They get Cam Rising and Brant Keithy back, maybe. Washington, certainly a candidate. Oregon is a candidate. If USC gets to the Pac-12 title game, which I hope they don't, maybe I'll see one of these teams again. But somebody needs to put USC in its place and get it out of the conversation, because they do not deserve to be there, because their defense stinks.
John Wilner, one of the best voices on the Pac-12, tweeted in the midst of USC surviving in triple overtime against Arizona that he feels like USC has to make a change at defensive coordinator in the middle of this season with Alex Grinch. Last week, USC outgained by Arizona 506 yards to 365, managed to win. The week before, outgained by Colorado 564 yards to 498. They have the best player in college football. I don't think Caleb Williams should or will win the Heisman, but he's the best player. That's not what the Heisman is, by the way. But even he can't keep up. He can't keep up with Alex Grinch's terrible defense. So they've survived so far, but it has to come to an end at some point. Point number 3 on the Frantic 14. Notre Dame needs a conference, and Notre Dame needs a break, man. It's the first time in Notre Dame history of playing 4 straight primetime games, loss at home on literally the last second of the game to Ohio State. Tight, close win, just as close at Duke. Now they lost at Louisville. Now they're coming home to get USC this week. This is one of these things. They have this agreement with the ACC, right? Where I think they play 6 ACC games a year, but then they have their own network for their home games that they have to please NBC. And the result is everybody wants a piece of them. And I just don't think, Landis, if they were in a conference, as much as Ohio State gets like, hey, go to Minnesota on a Thursday night to open the season in prime time, I don't think if Ohio State didn't want it, the Big Ten would make Ohio State play 4 straight primetime games. Notre Dame trying to serve too many people at the same time. They just needed a noon start against Rutgers in there.
Yeah.
And they didn't get it. And I think some people are like, Notre Dame's not for real. I still think they're a very good team. We just saw it coming. They ran out of gas, and it's because they're trying to be everything to everybody.
My read on that game was wrong. I thought that I was worried about that in the Duke game, and I actually did think it kind of showed up and they pulled that game out. But I felt like that was such an exhale moment for them to win that game that they would like flip a switch and get rolling, and that did seem to carry over into the Louisville game. Now, like I'm not saying that as an excuse, right? Because I think Notre Dame like didn't play its best football and probably should have won the last 2 games it's played. But you're right. Like they're not doing themselves any favors by doing this. Now in a 12-team playoff world, I guess it's different, right? You're less concerned about it. But even then in a 12-team playoff world, it's like you're grinding yourself into the dirt before you get to that point. It's okay to, join a conference that has good football, right? Join the Big Ten. You're still going to play the Ohio States, the Oregons, the Washingtons, USCs, UCLAs, Michigan, Penn State, but you're not going to play them all in the same season. And they're going to sprinkle in a Rutgers and a Northwestern for you so you can have some of those get right weeks, and they need those.
I don't know that anybody thought that Duke and Louisville were both going to be undefeated when they played Notre Dame this year. So they're playing also at night 4 straight undefeated teams because they beat Duke. That was Duke's first loss. So when you said, hey, Ohio State might be undefeated, USC might be undefeated, and then if you would have said before the season and in between, Duke and Louisville will both be undefeated, you'd be like, what are you talking about? So you didn't exactly see it coming. It's a lot to ask. This is one of those things. They're a draw. They're 49, 39, and 2 on the road all time in prime time. For considering it's Notre Dame, that's not a great record. And yes, it's on the road, but it's like everybody gets up for them. It's the kind of thing Ohio State says all the time. 4 in a row prime time was just too much to ask. All right, number 4 in the Frantic 14, we're going to talk about Iowa's defense without saying the B word, because I do feel a little bit bad that every time we talk about Iowa's defense, it's in the context of their terrible other thing led by the B word. Iowa has allowed in 6 games 42 points in the first half, 3-3, 10-10, 9-7. They've allowed 7 field goals and 3 touchdowns in the first half. And the reason I'm focused on the first half, they've had a couple games where they've given up touchdowns like in the final 2 minutes to make a 2-score game a 1-score game. But it's kind of like with a toddler. Like you want to be patient. The defense is putting up gates while the toddler offense led by the B word is trying to learn to walk. And so the first half, they're like, here, we'll shut the other guys down. You guys tried. Now I'm doing it again. I couldn't make it all the way through about talking about the good Iowa defense without the offensive context. That's a remarkable thing. Cooper DeJean is as good as they come in the backfield. Xavier Wampa at safety is playing great. Sebastian Castro at the opposite corner has played really well. They don't give up any yards after the catch. They tackle. They get pressure. They had 12 tackles for loss last week against Purdue. Just a reminder, it's a good defense on its own, regardless of what else is happening at Iowa.
They've been good all year, right? That the thing that was like kind of a missing piece for them was that defensive front getting after it a little more, and they did that against Purdue. They have 6 sacks in that game, right? And 12 tackles for loss, like you said. Sounds like they're going to get Noah Shannon back, the guy who was suspended for the gambling stuff that was happening out there. So that's another piece added to their defensive front. they're really good. I mean, they're always really good. We take it for granted, I think, how good they are, and they unfortunately get overshadowed by what's happening on the other side of the ball, which is an atrocity. But they play championship level defense. Like more often than not, they have played championship level defense under Kirk Ferentz. So I'm happy to shout them out for doing so.
And I feel like I probably talked about Hudson Card at quarterback for Purdue too much this year. But again, it's like against some guys who he's a guy who had a chance to do something, right? And the defense is just too good. All right, number 5 in the Frantic 14. I just want to talk about Oregon State because I think they're going to disappear for a while here. They do get UCLA this week, and UCLA is ranked, but then it's at Arizona, at Colorado, and Stanford before Oregon State finishes the season with Washington and Oregon. So they're going to, like, for about 5 weeks, we may not be talking about them as much on this show. DJ Uiagalelei played great against Cal. 19 of 25 for 275 and 5 touchdowns. It's the first 5-touchdown performance by an Oregon State quarterback since 2019. They're 5-1. They're 15th in the AP poll. Like, I just think they are really an excellent football team that just kind of caught Washington State on a really good week when Washington State beat them. I don't know. It's not that I feel bad for them because I just don't want people to forget, because I think if they can win one of the final 2 against Oregon or Washington, I think they might be in the Pac-12 title game, like with 2 losses, like with some tiebreaker stuff. Like, they still have a chance, but after a nice win over a Cal team that can move the ball, just a reminder, Oregon State good.
You see, I don't love giving up 40 to Cal, and I know one of the touchdowns was like on a short field with a weird decision to do an onside kick, but 40 I think is the most that Cal has scored this year. Or no, sorry, second most. They scored 58 on North Texas, 10 against Auburn, 31 against Idaho, 32 against Washington, 24 against Arizona State, and then 40 against Oregon State.
So you're doubting the Beavs?
We're going to talk about the flaws of the top Northern team, so I'll save it for then. But yeah, I'm slightly less high.
That'd be nice.
Yeah,
to Oregon State. They stole their conference from them. You know that, right?
I do know that. I do feel bad for them.
Pat McAfee trying to bring it to Oregon State. Just doing it for clicks, man. Come on. Give him some respect.
No, not Pat McAfee.
All right. I'm going to rip people now. Planting my flag, number 6 on the Frantic 14. SEC math, man. It's the worst kind of math there is. Kentucky got to 5-0 and number 20 in the AP poll this season by beating Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, Akron, Vanderbilt, and Florida. Those 5 teams were combined 10-20 this season. And one of those wins is because Florida beat Vanderbilt. They all stink. But people are like, Kentucky. So then Kentucky gets rolled by Georgia in honestly the first complete game that Georgia's played this season. And now everybody's like, Georgia's back, because puffed up Kentucky was never who they thought they were. But now it's somehow some glorious win for Georgia to beat them by 30. The math on Bama's back because, like, Texas was great because they beat Bama. Texas was never that good. That's bad SEC math. Now Bama's back because Bama beat Ole Miss and Texas A&M, 2 programs whose fans want to fire their coaches all the time. You can't want to fire Lane Kiffin and Jimbo Fisher one day and then be like, Bama's back, because they beat them the next. SEC math is bad for your brain. Don't fall for it. It is not approved on the AP standardized test. SEC math, man, it doesn't add up. Don't get trapped. Plant your flag, Landis.
The most complete team in all of college football resides in the North, and that team is the Michigan Wolverines, who I listen, if you're out there screaming they ain't played anybody yet, like, I hear you, but they're squashing everybody, and I feel like they're getting better. And they have 7 rushing touchdowns the last 2 weeks. They just throttled Minnesota, had their highest per carry average running the football last week against Minnesota. And that's the, like, kind of the area that I question for them. Like, what's up with your run game? It feels like they're getting that figured out. JJ McCarthy has been very good. We'll talk about that when we talk about the top teams in the North. There's some questions I have for sure. They're not infallible, but I do think they're most complete, both sides of the ball. Their defense is nasty, and they're getting Mason Graham back now on the defensive line too, who we've not talked about when we've discussed the best players in the North, but I think that conversation might be coming because he is a difference maker in a defensive line that might be the best Jim Harbaugh's had. And I know they had Aiden Hutchinson, like, depth and overall talent, this might be the best one they've had, and their defensive tackles are very good. I'd put them up against anybody in the nation, and they're good at all 3 levels on defense. So they're squashing who's in front of them. I wish they played a more difficult schedule. I wish they had, like, somebody with a pulse in their non-conference slate. They did not. They're not going to play a game of consequence until they play Penn State in November. So it's still wait and see mode. But what I've seen so far from them, I think they are the most complete team in college football.
And that will lead us right into our Northern team rankings, where we are going to talk about what is the issue for all these really good teams. That wraps up the Frantic 14 Northern rankings. Coming next on Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis back on Kings of the North. We do it every week here. I think, no, we did it last week. We do this every week. We change the player rankings sometimes. We did some unit rankings. We do quarterback rankings. We're going to do receiver rankings later. But the best teams, the Kings of the North, we try to do that every week. And so we rank the teams that we think are worth being ranked, Landis. We are not beholden to a top 5. We're not beholden to a top 10. A little bit in my mind, I sort of say to myself, like, who are still legitimate playoff contenders. So once you're kind of out of that, it's sort of like, I don't know. It's no disrespect, but it's like, well, you're still good. But am I going to bother to figure out whether you're 7th in the North or 9th in the North? I don't know. All these teams are still in that mix. Let's get to our Northern rankings this week. One is Michigan. And last week they weren't one. They did something this week to get noted, to move past Washington. Washington is 2. Ohio State and Penn State are tied for 3rd. Oregon 5, Oregon State 6, Utah 7, tied for 7th with Washington State. I did not rank Notre Dame, which is why Notre Dame didn't make this list. You did. The qualifying threshold is get ranked by both of us as we do this and do an overall combined consensus rankings. So we're going to start with the flaws of these teams. And as you led us into this with Michigan, Michigan is number 1. And I think the reason they're number 1 is because it's harder to find their flaws. Because we did unit rankings last week, and it's like, hey, the Penn State defense, hey, the Washington offense, hey, the Ohio State defense. But when you talk about both sides of the ball, nobody in the North, and I think nobody in the country, is as good on both sides of the ball as Michigan right now. I did kind of write down a weakness, but I'm curious to hear you say what you think Michigan's weakness might be.
If you would have asked me 2 weeks ago, I probably would have kept saying the line I've been saying about them. Like, I think they need to run the ball better than they currently are, but they've sort of answered that, I think, the last 2 weeks. And not that they're complete, but like they're climbing the rankings. I think the first time I mentioned they might have been like 68th in the country in rushing, and now they're top 40. Like, they seem to be finding their footing. There's still some weird stuff there happening with Donovan Edwards. I don't know why he's not been effective, and he hasn't scored yet this year, which is really strange. So like, it's kind of Blake Corum or nothing, which I guess is not tremendous and could be considered a weakness of theirs, because I thought the 2 backs last year were certainly a strength, and I don't know that they are right now. So I tweaked it a little bit, I guess. Like, I don't know that I consider this a weakness, but I still want to see more before I guess I can fully grasp the idea of them being able to throw the ball the way they need to when it matters most. And JJ McCarthy has improved in those areas this year. Like, if you look at his numbers this year compared to last year, non-play action throws versus play action throws, there was a significant dip in his efficiency when he was throwing on non-play action throws last year. This year, he's much better. He's 2 full yards per attempt better on non-play action throws than he was last year. His passer rating on non-play action throws is like 30 points higher than it was last year. So he has made those improvements, but he's not really had to show it yet against a defense that I think can give Michigan problems. So maybe that's not quite a weakness. It's still a question in my mind, but that was kind of the first thing that leaped to mind for me when I considered the question for them.
I've been saying all year, and I think most people would agree with it, there's not a super team in college football this year. Not like Georgia in 21, not like LSU in 19, not like Bama in 20. I don't think Georgia last year was a super team. They were really good, but they weren't a super team. I think if there is one, it's Michigan. Now, I don't think there is one. But if there is, if you're looking for somebody who's just squashing people, this is your leading candidate. I really like Florida State. Week to week, both sides of the ball, they are not a machine like Michigan is. Georgia, I guess, played better. I don't think Georgia has played like Michigan for most of the year. Washington's offense is relentless, but I think when you're talking defensively, they don't stack up to Michigan right now. And then Penn State's defense is awesome. Offensively, they aren't close to stacking up to Michigan. And Ohio State's very good, but Ohio State's working some stuff out in a way that I don't think Michigan's working stuff out right now. I think Michigan's there. So they are in the FEI rankings, which I really like. Brian Fremeau, it's like stuff that it doesn't take recruiting into account and that kind of thing. They're third in the nation in offense and fourth in defense. So they're kind of everything. Explosive plays on offense, they don't have a ton. They have 11 plays of 30 yards or more, which is tied for 39th in the Power 5. So they're not super explosive, but they don't kind of need to be because they just grind it out. And it's almost more effective for them to not be explosive and just smother you. So that's one thing I wrote down. And then the other thing is the schedule is what it is. Now, again, they had the UCLA series canceled. The next 2 years, they have Texas and Oklahoma scheduled in the non-conference over the next 4 seasons. So they do want to do this, right? They play Notre Dame a lot in the non-conference. So, I mean, it's a bad spot for them the last 2 years.
They did. They canceled UCLA though, right?
No, I know, but it's not like their history is never playing anybody.
Yeah.
It's just last year and this year not playing anybody. So do you think that could actually hurt them, though? It makes it more difficult to judge them. Do you think it makes it more likely they might lose to Penn State because they're going to face Penn State having played nobody? Like, is that a flaw in that way? That because a flaw is something that can actually hurt you, not just hurt our perception of you.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think similarly of Oregon too, which I guess we'll talk about. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard to gauge what those flaws might be because they haven't played anybody. But I suppose like inexperience in big games up until the moment you have to play one, which for Michigan, like I don't think you want to be playing your first game like that in November, right? I think you want some early tests, and they just don't have them. So it's not that I don't think they're built for it, because like that they have a lot back from last year, and they were in a playoff game and they played Ohio State and beat Ohio State the last 2 years. So I'm not super worried about it, but I guess that could be considered a flaw.
And again, we're not like the intent is not to talk down our best Northern teams. It's to be realistic. And somebody had actually mentioned this to us of obviously people know we do, Ohio State stuff, and we end up talking about what's wrong with Ohio State a lot. And somebody said, well, can we talk about what's wrong with other teams? And I think it's a good way to look at teams. I do think it's interesting. So we'll go to number 2, Washington. For me, Washington, like their sack rate and their stuff rate defensively is not very high. They're not very aggressive defensively. They are 122nd in the nation out of 133 teams in tackles for loss per game, and they are 124th in the nation in sacks per game. So, like, if it gets down to it and they can't only destroy people with their offense and they face a good defense like they're going to this week, and we'll talk about it more obviously at the end of the show, I do wonder, Landis, if, Braylon Trice is a pretty good edge guy, but I wonder if they're just open to getting rolled by a good offense, which is going to force them into a shootout where maybe they're not getting stops because they can't make the kind of play on a second or third down to force a punt.
Yeah, I think that's a fair concern because I also went to the defensive side of the ball, obviously. And there are a few things you can nitpick there. They're terrible in the red zone on defense. They've given up 10 touchdowns and 14 trips. Their last 2 opponents, Arizona. Cal and Arizona, the last 2 games, 7 for 7 scoring touchdowns in the red zone. Not good, because I don't think they're not a tremendous defense to begin with. I think they might have like an average defense, and part of that's disappointing because I think we thought this front was going to be pretty good, and I don't know that they've been that good so far. But if they encounter a team that can move the ball a little bit, at the moment, those teams are finishing drives with touchdowns, which is not great. Now, if there's any team in the country that is equipped to play and thrive in a shootout, it's probably Washington. But I don't know if you want to test that, right? If you're them, and they're going to get tested, I think, in that regard coming up this Saturday. So I think they need to tighten up on defense, and maybe it's an instance of a talented team like playing with its food a little bit, like we see teams do that. So like I'm willing to entertain that notion, but it needs to be better than it's been because I do think it's something that can bite them.
And we're nitpicking him a little bit. I do think Jabbar Muhammad is like a legit number 1 corner for them. Braylon Trice is a legit edge guy for them. So they have some pieces. So they might get better at this. But for right now, it's the thing that could bite them. Let's go to number 3 on our list. Tied with Ohio State is Penn State. This one I think we're going to be in agreement on this. What do you think the flaw for Penn State is?
I didn't want to be as general as just saying the offense, although I think you could.
An entire side of the ball.
Yeah, I think you could. It's for me the same thing you said about Michigan. It's the lack of explosion. Yeah, they're number 87 in the country in plays of 10 yards or more. There are 3 teams in the country who have fewer plays of 30 yards or more than Penn State. Those teams are Ball State, Minnesota, and Sam Houston State. And I think part of that is wanting to gradually work in a new starting quarterback in Drew Aller. And I think they're doing that. But I also think part of it is that they're just, they don't have a ton of talent, I don't think, on that side of the ball. I think they're probably fairly average at receiver. And they thought they were going to be better with some transfer additions, and I don't think they're as good as they thought they would be. They're not running the ball as well as I think they thought they would with Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. And I don't think that offensive line, outside of Olu Fashanu's pass blocking prowess, has been particularly good for them this year. So I think that they're not a bad offense, but I think they're like an average offense. And I think people came into the season thinking that Penn State had the chance to be like a top 25 kind of offense in the country. And they're certainly not that.
I really zeroed in on the passing game. Drew Aller's average depth of target is 6.4 yards, which is actually tied with Bo Nix at Oregon. It's 26th among Northern quarterbacks. There's only 28 teams in the North. So, but Oregon's is very different. Like Oregon is all about yards after the catch, and Bo Nix is getting it out and guys are going. That's not what Penn State is. So Oregon's throwing short by design. I think Penn State's throwing short because they can't do anything else. And it's just gonna put a lot on that defense, right? When you think about how they're going to have to go about trying to beat Michigan or Ohio State, I mean, I think both those games, they have to try to keep them in the 20s, right? And the way Michigan grinds it out on offense and the explosive potential of Ohio State, I don't know how easy that will be to do, even for arguably the best defense in the country. So maybe by that time, Landis, they'll let it rip. Maybe they're playing with their food a little bit. Maybe by design, they're trying to hold some things back because they know they can win with basically only defense so far. But I think this is as big of a flaw as any very good Northern team has, is the sort of very mundane lack of explosiveness for Penn State's offense.
Yeah, I think that's right, and it's more glaring because we thought it would be good, right? Everyone was really excited about Drew Aller, and like this is the best offensive line that James Franklin has had, which still might be true, but they've not been as good as they hoped they would be, which is disappointing for them. So, yeah, I have a hard time seeing Penn State at the moment being capable of scoring enough points to win either of their two big games.
But their defense is so good, I still think they're one of the 5 best teams in the country because that's how good that defense is.
Yeah,
so I mean, like again, now I feel bad about this whole segment.
No,
can we just talk about the different ways the best Northern teams make their fans happy? Or
we're keeping them honest. We're keeping them honest. It's necessary.
So, but I think it's reassuring when we're talking about everybody's flaws except your team's flaws, because that is the point of this. Your team's flaws, but I think it is valuable. You know what I want to do? Let's do Georgia's flaws. Can we shove this in? Mike didn't make a graphic for it. Can we just add Georgia's flaws? They have no receivers. Is that a flaw? Their entire offense is centered around one person. Okay, I'm not doing that. But like we could, now we should have done that. We'll do that next week. Here's what's wrong with Southern football. All right, tied with Ohio State. Tied with Penn State is Ohio State. Tied for 3rd in our rankings. What's Ohio State's flaw, Landis?
I think there are a few different things on offense you can pick, but I picked the offensive line. Like, they can't run the ball. We'll see if that matters. But I also still question their ability to protect Kyle McCord when they play at Penn State and when they play at Michigan. I don't think they've played a team yet with a tremendous pass rush. They played a team with a pretty good defensive line in Notre Dame, but they're not a defensive line that really gets after you.
No.
They're going to see one in 2 weeks when Penn State comes to Columbus. And I'm nervous about that if I'm Ohio State. I'm nervous about Michigan if I'm Ohio State. I might be nervous about Wisconsin, if only because it's hard to communicate when you're playing at Camp Randall, even if Wisconsin's defense isn't a world beater. So I think this offensive line is bad. It's not, they're not in a good place right now.
That's why we did a 2-hour tackle YouTube show before the season on Kings of Columbus. It's coming to fruition. And the odd thing about it is the guy that we thought was the most locked in, Donovan Jackson, has just not played well at left guard. That we thought that was an anchor. And it feels like instead, and you don't want to make excuses. It's like, oh, it's everybody else's fault. But, he's between 2 new starters at left tackle and center. And instead of, him helping lift everybody up, it feels like that situation is dragging him down a little bit, which is a tough spot to be in. Within that, I just sort of talked about and Ryan Day's talked about it. Bill Connolly at ESPN had good stats about they're just behind schedule all the time because they're not effective on first and second down. They wind up in third and longs, and that's based on an inability and repeated attempt to run the ball on early downs. And the inability is based on the lack of run blocking by the offensive line. Because I think that's, of all the things you talked about, yeah, Chop Robinson might make them pay off the edge in that Penn State game. But for now, they just look lost. They look lost in the run game a lot of the time. And it's throwing them off until they decide to run it far less. It's going to continue to be a huge issue.
Yeah, they're running. I think, yeah, they're running too much. Yep.
Oregon is number 5. Not quite as obvious. This is a pretty good Oregon team. I don't know that I believe this. They are so reliant on this short passing thing. Of all the receivers in the North, they have 4 receivers in the top 17 in yards after catch because everything is yards after catch. Troy Franklin's really good. He can be a downfield threat for them, but I just wonder if you can do something, and easier said than done, but to sort of just tackle guys on the short throws. They're so designed to play offense that way. I wonder if you can force them to try to beat you over the top. But then, by the way, they have a 6th-year quarterback who's been through the mill and a number 1 receiver in Troy Franklin. So maybe they can. I don't know. Maybe the flaws on the defensive side of the ball, though. What'd you have for Oregon?
The same thing as you. Like, can they adapt if a team comes out and like shuts down their screen game and their short passing game? And I don't know. Like, look at their schedule right there. They play Utah. I think Utah is probably the best candidate for that. Like, I don't even think Washington is, to be perfectly honest. Oregon State, maybe if they play them, because I do like Oregon State's defensive front. Maybe they can kind of disrupt some of that stuff, but it was hard to find one. And I think it's hard to find one for similar reasons to Michigan. It's that like the schedule just hasn't given us an opportunity, I think, to unearth some of that stuff. They've just not played really anybody of note. And I guess they played like Texas Tech close, and like Texas Tech threw the ball on them a little bit, although they had 3 interceptions in that game. Maybe that was more Tyler Shuck than it was Oregon doing anything. So maybe that's it. Maybe like, and obviously that'd be important if they're going up against Washington this week, but it was difficult to really pinpoint one. So I also settled on like, can you bomb it down the field or run the football if teams take you out of what you've done most effectively on offense to this point? And
I don't know if their defense is great. I do think their defense has been better than Washington's defense. So it's not as glaring as like, hey, we went to Washington, we went straight to the defensive side of the ball for them. Number 6 in our rankings is Oregon State. I just put like, I like them. I just put like overall talent level. I just think they're climbing up the hill a little bit. And especially when they get to Oregon and Washington, it might just be too much. Now, Damian Martinez is a dude in the backfield, and DJ Uyunglele was a 5-star, and they have multiple really like real dudes on the offensive line. And by the way, when we get to the receivers, I'm gonna be very excited to talk about Silas Bolden. But like, I don't know. Just compared to everybody else on this list, I just wonder if when push comes to shove, they're a little bit an overachieving team that isn't going to hang. Do you have more specific criticisms of my Beavs?
I think just that dynamic might show up the most in their secondary when they play a Washington or any team that's really capable of throwing the ball, which happened, I think, against Washington State earlier this year. Their pass defense just scares me. I don't think it's very good. And there are teams on this schedule that are certainly capable of exploiting that, which is why I have come off of my thought that they could win the Pac-12 this year. I just don't know that they're built to stop the thing they're going to have to stop to get there. And like generally, I think their defense is okay. I don't think it's a tremendous defense, but especially on the back end, I think they're deficient there in a few areas that I think are going to get exposed.
And then it's just like, oh, so you got a little tiny deficiency in the back end. Here's Cam Ward, Caleb Williams, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix to exploit that time after time after time. It's a tough world to live in. All right, last 2 teams on our list. One is Washington State. What'd you have for them?
Turnovers, they turned the ball over a lot. They turned the ball over 4 times against UCLA last week and lost that game. They've turned it over 9 times this year. They turned it over 17 times in 13 games last year. They just don't value the football enough.
Yeah.
Whether that's like Cam Ward throwing interceptions or Cam Ward holding the thing like it's a, I don't know, loaf of bread in his hand while he's running around with it. They had some like terrible open field fumbles against UCLA. Like they just have to, they can't have those miscues. They're not talented enough to overcome them when they're playing the best teams in the Pac-12. So I think that is the thing they need to nip in the bud. And if they don't, they're not going to really contend in this league.
As somebody who is constantly asking Ohio State to stop running the ball, I'm reluctant to say this, and I know this is Washington State's style. This is what they want to do. They're second in the nation in passing yards per game at 365. They're 119th in rushing yards per game at 104, and they were the same last year, and they're basically like, this is what they are. But that might be the breaking point for me, right? Yeah. Like that's like they did not look really good, very good against UCLA. I think they might have had like 20 yards rushing in the loss to UCLA last week. So that it's like, okay, like don't run it, but like not like that. More than 20 yards a game when you're playing a good opponent. So I thought that was a little bit rough. Last team is Utah, tied with Washington State in our rankings. Their offense hasn't been great because their quarterback and their best guy with the ball in his hands have been out the whole year. So like offense, what'd you have?
Yeah, it's that, but it's like it's with an asterisk, I guess.
Yeah,
like you get Cam Rising back and you get Brent Keithy back. It's a different conversation. I guess there's the question, even if you do get both those guys back, like what's the ceiling? I don't think it's like you suddenly go from one of the worst offenses in the country to like a top 20 offense, but you don't need to be a top 20 offense to win when your defense is as good as Utah's is. So can they, one, get those guys back, and two, be good enough on that side of the ball to like kind of get back into this Pac-12 race? Because if they don't get, it's mostly Cam Rising. I think if they don't get Cam Rising back, I think they have no shot. Like we've said before, they're Iowa if they don't get him back.
This is a team that 2 years ago got into a shootout with Ohio State in the Rose Bowl and hung until the final seconds. So it's not like they're incapable. It's going to be a tight end focused offense, but they know how it looks when it's working. It's just not working so well when their starting quarterback's hurt. All right, that's it for our rankings of our top teams in the North. Next up, we'll go behind enemy lines with the teams in the South you need to worry about. Not worry. There's no worrying. Be curious about. Next on Kings of the North. We do it every week. We go behind enemy lines. We give you the top 5 teams in the South. This doesn't change the number. It's always the top 5. Listen, there's 69 teams in the Power 5. We only took 28. There's 41 other teams to choose from. We should be like thinking about 18 different teams to squeeze into this top 5, but that's not what we're doing this year. We're trying to find teams. Number 1, for the second week in a row, maybe because I picked them to win the national championship, and I'm still beholden to that a little bit. They have not looked great. Florida State has 2 nice wins over LSU and Clemson. They have not been necessarily hitting on all cylinders since then, but they are still number 1 in our behind enemy lines ranking. 2 is Georgia. 3 is Oklahoma. 4 is Texas, coming off the loss to Oklahoma. 5 is USC. And Landis voted for Bama, but I didn't. Beat a team who doesn't want to fire its coach, and you can be in the top 5, Alabama. So I know everyone thinks Bama's coming. Like, let me know when they're here. Can you let me know? Can Nick give us a heads up when they're here? Or are they maybe going to go back to Tyler Buchner as their starting quarterback again? What? They changed. They went from a starting quarterback. They made Buchner the starting quarterback. Now he's like their 5th quarterback. Let us know. Can we get a signal? Can someone in Tuscaloosa send a carrier pigeon to let us know when Bama's back? Florida State's number 1, Landis. I know you didn't vote him number 1, but I don't know. I'm not there on Georgia. Georgia's 2. How do you think about Florida State and Georgia right now?
I think Georgia looked like Georgia last week, which I know you disagree with, and it's fine. Florida State has, like, they keep winning, right? I think they've been unimpressive aside from those 2 wins, and those 2 wins have a lot of shine taking off them. It turns out LSU has the worst pass defense in the country. So,
Who knew?
so
Who knew?
I wish I would have known that before picking them to win the national championship, but here we are. So like I think Florida State is good, like good on both sides of the ball, good on both lines, certainly explosive, but their schedule or the caliber of their opponents sort of like unraveling a little bit, which is like no fault of their own, just has me questioning them a little bit. And like Georgia's not played anybody, right? But they we'll see if what they did last week was them like finding another gear and like starting to ratchet it up. Maybe it wasn't. Like we've seen, I wonder like how much 2015 Ohio State is in this current Georgia team. And if like we think they got stuff figured out and then someone's still gonna get them, I think that's on the table. But they looked really good. So I put them 1. I had Florida State 5th actually. I had Oklahoma 2 and Texas 3, and I had Alabama 4, as you said, because I think Alabama is good. I can't believe you put USC there. I didn't even consider ranking USC. I'm done with that team. They stink.
Caleb Williams like didn't even complete half his passes against Arizona, but he just bails them out with ridiculous things. He does ridiculous things. He is an unbelievable playmaker. And so in a world where I remain uncertain about Bama, and Jalen Milroe in his own way is a playmaker, but like if I'm uncertain, I'll take the team with a quarterback. The team I want to talk briefly about is Oklahoma. You know, I had been saying that I still think the Big Ten is in very good position to get 2 teams in the playoff. The SEC is going to get a team in, whether they really truly deserve it or not. We'll see how that shakes down. The Pac-12 is there's like 5 or 6 good teams in the Pac-12. So I don't know how that's going to shake out. I certainly think Washington very well may be and looks so far like one of the 4 best teams in the country. I just don't know if the schedule and the way things are going to shake out will allow that. The wild card is the Big 12 to me because Oklahoma just beat Texas, and I don't know who else is going to get Oklahoma. And it might wind up being an Oklahoma-Texas rematch in the Big 12 title game. And then what if Texas wins that game? I mean, this last one went down to the final seconds. Then you have 2 one-loss Big 12 teams. I don't know who else is going to get in Oklahoma's way with the schedule they have. Do you think Oklahoma might be actually good, or are they just taking advantage of Texas is not as good as anyone thought, and the Big 12 doesn't have a great team?
Yeah, I think I like Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma's good. I know like they messed around a little bit with Cincinnati. I think that defense is like much better than it was last year. It does seem like Brent Venables has like kind of gotten that figured out. And there were times earlier this year where you like watch Dylan Gabriel, like, I don't know if that's the guy. Like, is Jackson Arnold going to play? But Dylan Gabriel has seemed to bounce back well too, and I thought he played well against Texas. So I think both those teams are pretty good. I don't know that I think both of them are going to make the playoff. Because I don't think the Big 12 is good enough to prop them both up like that. But there'll be an interesting decision to be made, I guess, on the part of the playoff committee if these 2 teams play each other again in the Big 12 championship, which seems likely, and Texas wins that game and they have a split there. I don't know what you do in that case.
They can't. No, they're not both going to make it. I don't know if either would make it at 12-1, depending how things shake down. I don't know. Depends on that Bama.
If Texas, because I think the Texas, whenever Alabama is going to continue to look better. And if they like right or wrong,
did Nick send you a message? Did Nick let you know they're here?
No,
you're believing it. He's here.
I'm not. Their defense is awesome. Their defense is tremendous. Like it's incredible. They're the inverse of USC, but I think that Alabama's defense is better than USC's offense in like the national context. And maybe Alabama's offense is worse than USC's defense, but like Jalen Milroe also makes like 3 throws a game. We're like, well, if you just did that all the time, you'd never lose a game. So I'm not tremendously confident they're going to figure stuff out on offense, but I think that defense is awesome. So I think I can help them get by.
All right. That's enough. Time to rank receivers. Knights of the North at the receiver position. Next on Kings of the North. All right. Time to rank receivers. Is that okay? We did this, Landis? I said, let's do receivers instead of players.
Yeah, because actually when you first said it, I was like, because we typically do like 15 and then pick 10 from that. I was like, are there gonna be enough to rank? And it turns out there were. Like, there's some actually really good receiver play in the North that I was I'm thankful that we're gonna get to enlighten people here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's maybe like 3 tiers in our top 10 here of like some dudes, then some really good guys, and then maybe around 10 or 11, it got a little dicey. But one of the reasons I wanted to do this is because we call it Knights of the North. That's our Northern Heisman that we are eventually going to crown people in a ceremony at medieval times. But for now, it's just a list made by two men who are doing their best. And Marvin Harrison Jr. was at the top of that list at the beginning of this season. And then he had 18 receiving yards in the opener. And I was like, oh, I don't know if we can have him number one anymore. And then we haven't done player rankings every single week. But I wanted to talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. because his NFL status, his draft respect, his work ethic, his skills haven't changed. But he's had 3 100-yard games this season, and then he had 2 games where he basically did nothing. So he's coming off 8 catches for 163 yards against Maryland, and he's number 1 on this list of top Northern receivers, number 1 for both of us. He's doing it on a bad ankle that he hurt against Notre Dame, making a block. What do you think of the way Marvin Harrison Jr. played against Maryland, and where are you generally with him right now?
I mean, that's the Marvin that we've all kind of come to expect, right? And it's amplified by the fact that we know he's playing hurt now. Like, he played hurt last year, apparently. We didn't know that. He told us that 3 weeks ago that he was playing on an injured ankle for much of last season, and that limited him a little bit, and he still had the season that he had. But now we know he's hurt, and he came out and played his best game of the year against Maryland after sustaining that injury against Notre Dame, which I do think it speaks to something that maybe people don't always appreciate about receivers, just sort of generally, and maybe about Marvin more specifically, that there can be a toughness involved with this position that I think Marvin does have. But you saw the array of ways he can help Ohio State's offense, right? He was a target over the middle of the field, which I think Ohio State needs to do more. He had an incredible catch down the sideline on a really well thrown ball from Kyle McCord on like 3rd and 22 or something like that, whatever it was they converted. Had another catch on the sideline, got into the end zone. So like that's what Ohio State needs every week, right? It can't just be a momentary blip in a season that's otherwise like a little bit underwhelming compared to what we expected for Marvin Harrison. But if that's what we're going to get every week, which I don't think is an unreal expectation for a guy that some people said might be the best player in all of college football coming into this season, then he deserves to be number 1 here.
He has 499 receiving yards. That's 26th in the nation. It's 15th in the Power 5. But it's more than stats, obviously. He's averaging 20 yards per reception, which is really good. Like, that's big play stuff for a guy that they also throw bubble screens to at times. So I do think Marv was back. The Marvin Harrison Jr. that people got to know last year, expected for this season, even with an injury. That's who he was against Maryland, and that's why he's number 1. Number 2 on our list is a guy who would have been 1 on this list while Marvin Harrison Jr. maybe wasn't having great games. And it's Rome Odunze, who has 608 receiving yards this year for Washington. He leads the North. He's 4th in the Power 5. He's great, man. Like, he can do it after the catch. He's a big physical guy. He's really good on contested catches. His contested catch rate, according to PFF, is 62.5, which is really high. He's a number 1 receiver. He's a classic number 1 receiver in an offense that chucks it all over the place, but he's more than the offense, right? He gets opportunities because of his play caller, because of the scheme, and because Michael Penix is great. But this guy absolutely belongs at number 2.
Yeah, and you're right. He would have been number 1 had we done this a week ago, I think. He's tied for the most contested catches, by the way, in the North with 5. There's a few guys that have 5, but he has 5, and he has a much larger target share and total targets than a lot of the players that are also in the conversation there. So, like, yeah, what's impressive about Rome Odunze, which I also think is impressive about Marvin Harrison Jr., and I guess they both benefit from, while they're the best of their group, they're still in a pretty good group, but like, to show up week after week and be like the top of the scouting report guy and still produce, is incredibly impressive, and something worth noting, I think, week after week, as we become a little spoiled by what some of these receivers are. Like, these guys are awesome.
From Bishop Gorman High School in Vegas. You know anybody else who went to Bishop Gorman, Landis?
Dorian Thompson Robinson. Yeah.
Yeah. Great for him. Tate Martell. It's a running joke. Tate Martell. Okay. Third is Rome Odunze's teammate, and I was sort of glad that we're in agreement on this. Jalen McMillan is third on our list. He got hurt in the Michigan State game, so he missed the last 2 games and half the Michigan State game. But he has 20 catches on 24 targets this year. His yards after the catch is great, and I just thought he was everything you want a slot receiver to be in the first 2.5 weeks of the season, and I thought he was awesome. And I was glad we continued to give him that nod. He almost played 2 weeks ago before their bye. He almost was ready. He's definitely going to play this week against Oregon. It's going to be huge to have him back.
And I feel like you can feel it a little bit, right? That he's not there. It's not that like Washington's offense has been bad, but maybe it's been a little less relentless is the word that you use with Jalen McMillan out of the lineup. So part of it was understanding how good he was last year because the body of work and sample size this year is small because of the injury, but he had carried over what was a tremendous season last year into this one. It was just unfortunate for him that he got hurt. And he's such a good compliment to Rome Odunze, which is like, I think that can, when you're in that world, you can get overshadowed a little bit. And I think that at times maybe has happened to Emeka Egbuka at Ohio State. But Jalen McMillan's ability to still shine in a world where he's playing on the field every snap with Rome Odunze is impressive to me.
Fourth on our list is Troy Franklin of Oregon. He has 535 receiving yards, which is second in the North to Rome Odunze, another true number 1 guy. As we talked about, lots of yards after the catch in the Oregon offense, but I do feel like he's the one guy who can also be a threat down the field. So he is so valuable to what they do. And the way that Washington kind of kept rolling, Jalen Polk stepped in. We'll get to him in a little bit for Washington. When McMillan went out, I don't know what would happen to Oregon if Troy Franklin went out because he is so primary in everything they want to do.
That's why I had Franklin on my list 3rd and McMillan 4th, right? And I think if you had it flipped, that's totally fine. But that was the reasoning, is because I think if you take any of the one out of Washington's offense, I still think that's a pretty deadly passing attack. And I would include Rome Odunze in that, which is a credit to Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan. If you take Troy Franklin away from Oregon, like I think they have to rethink the way they want to play football because he's so important to what they do. And I think you're right. Like on the conversation of if you have to get away from the screen game, can you throw it downfield over teams? I think Troy Franklin is a guy who can do that for you too.
All right, number 5 on our list is the guy that you said sometimes does get underrated at Ohio State. That's Emeka Egbuka. What do you think about him being 5 here?
Yeah, he's been a little hot or cold too, along with Marv. And a lot of this vote was the Notre Dame game and how important he was for Ohio State there. It was like Marv didn't have a great game. Notre Dame was taking him away. Ohio State needed somebody to step up, especially kind of on 3rd down and on that last 2-minute drive where Ohio State won the game. And that guy was Emeka Egbuka. And I think both of them on the whole have probably not been quite as good as many thought they would be this year, which I think is less about them and more about just the transition happening at the quarterback position and the offense trying to figure out what they want to be. But he's really good. And he's also, now he's hurt, right? He hurt his ankle against Maryland. We'll have to see how long that might hold him out. Maybe he doesn't play this week against Purdue. But in addition to him being a really good receiver, he is a guy who, when Ohio State needs to get something going on the ground game, they'll just hand a sweep to Emeka Egbuka and he'll get him 9 yards, and then the offense is off and rolling a little bit.
He's only 27th in the North in receiving yards with 303, but there are 2 guys in our top 10 that are here almost entirely because of one game. Emeka Egbuka is one of them because Ohio State doesn't win the Notre Dame game without him. Yeah. He has the biggest catch of the year for Ohio State, the 3rd and 19 reception that got him down to the 1. Had another drive, another scoring drive that was basically all him. So that is enough. And again, he's viewed as a 1st-round pick. That's enough to get him to 5th on that list. 6th is Roman Wilson of Michigan. He has 8 touchdowns. That's 1st in the North, tied for 3rd in the nation. 22 catches on 29 targets. 382 yards is 11th in the North. He has a pretty good average depth of target for kind of like the kind of player that he is. Like, it's not just little dump off easy throws to him. And 8 touchdowns isn't nothing, man.
Yeah, he's got a good thing going with JJ, and he's made some impressive, I think, contested catches on some of those touchdowns too. He only has 3 on the year, but I think all 3 might have been touchdowns. Like, he's, for a guy who's not gigantic, he's pretty good in contested catch situations. And talk about like someone who might be able to unlock a little bit of explosion for Michigan's offense. Maybe I think it's him, right? There I suppose are other candidates there. Like their tight end Colston Loveland, I think is really good, but Roman Wilson has taken a step forward. Like I don't know that he was like really on anyone's radar in terms of like NFL guys coming into the year, but now you like read some early draft stuff of the college football season, and like Roman Wilson shows up a lot as a guy who's rising up those draft boards a little bit.
Number 7 is one of my favorite players in the North. It's Silas Bolden at Oregon State. He has 41 targets this season, no drops. He is 5'8", 157 pounds, and he's like a sideline deep threat guy. Like this is not just little slants and let him run. Like he is battling. He is like battling down the sideline against corners. He has 364 receiving yards. That's 15th in the North. But this guy, it's a crazy combination. He is a little shot out of a cannon kind of slot receiver who also they're just like line up as an X receiver. Like, okay, one-on-one deep shot, go win. And he does. So like that combination, I don't know that I've seen a guy this size asked to do the things he does, and he does them well.
He is like, I think sort of the embodiment of what Oregon State is, right? Like doing more with less. Like you shouldn't be able to do the things that you're doing at that size on the outside, but somehow you find a way to be effective. He had a great catch down the sideline against Cal this week, another contested catch situation. I don't really know how he does it when you watch him play. It doesn't quite compute when you look at his body type and then see some of the things he's able to do. It also makes me wonder, like, should you use him more as a slot guy? Should you like get him the ball in space and get him the ball quickly and see what he can do with it? Because he is good after the catch, but if you look at his after the catch numbers, they're not quite as high as you think they would be for a guy who's built like he is, because he's living the world of a 6'4" X receiver, despite the fact that he's 5'8".
8th on our list is the other guy who's here almost because of one game, because Josh Kelly destroyed Oregon State almost single-handedly, Landis.
Yeah, like he had maybe 3 catches in that game that might be like all candidates for catch of the year. He was doing some insane stuff against Oregon State, but he's another guy too that's like a heavy target guy who also has no drops this year, like Silas Bolden. He hasn't dropped the pass, and they're a little more by committee, I think, in terms of the receiver approach at Washington State. It's like I think I said before, it's like a lesser form of what Washington has going on, but I think all 3 are good. And I think you could have put any of the 3 on this list if you wanted to. The others being Kyle Williams and Lincoln Victor, right, are the other 2. But yeah, the game that he had against Oregon State was absurd. And like, if you want to watch some fun receiver highlights, go pull that up.
Yeah, so it's Josh Kelly of Washington State. Had a one-handed catch, like he scooped it off a guy's knee practically. Had another touchdown where he tried to get tackled by 4 different guys and spun off of all of them and ran into the end zone. Had another great contested catch in the end zone. We had a lot of praise for Cam Ward, the Washington State quarterback, after that game, and justifiably so. But Josh Kelly was wild, man. And so he's 379 receiving yards, is 12th in the North, but like impact, holy moly, like Washington State would not be where they are without the game he had there. 9th on our list is Keandre Lambert-Smith of Penn State, 372 yards. That's 14th in the North. 7.2 yards after catch is pretty good. And again, they need him, man. Like we already talked about, like Penn State, this is kind of all they have here. This is a huge burden for this guy. He's certainly not in tier 1, not close to tier 1. And I don't know that he's in tier 2. But he deserves to be like somewhere between 9th and 14th on a list like this. And they're going to need him. He might be the difference of whether Penn State can beat Ohio State and Michigan if a guy like this makes big plays.
Yeah, I think he is the reason that Penn State's offense to this point has been like good enough, right? Yeah. It's not been particularly great for all the reasons we discussed earlier in this episode, but I do think he's been a bit of a bright spot, and he's bailed Drew Aller out a couple times too, I think, on bad throws. Like I remember, like, was it the West Virginia game? Everyone's like, "Oh, Drew Aller tore them up." It's like, go back and watch this. Like, Drew Aller was fine, but he threw like 2 passes that should have been picked off, but instead Keandre Lambert-Smith caught them and took them for touchdowns. Yeah. So he's doing that for them, and they desperately needed. He would be helped tremendously if like literally anyone else could step up and be a threat in the passing game, but at the moment he's the only one doing that. So I think for that alone, he deserves to be ranked here. You're right. He's not tier 1. I don't think he's tier 2. And maybe there are some other players across the North who are individually more talented than he is that aren't even on this list, but he's doing a lot for a team that's important in the Northern conversation.
He's a number 2 receiver who's forced to be a number 1 because Parker Washington went to the NFL.
Yeah.
And in a world where Jahan Dotson's been at Penn State and Chris Godwin's been at Penn State has dudes at receiver. If they had a dude like that, Keandre Lambert-Smith is like an awesome 2. But he has to carry this burden because otherwise it's super young guys. It's a MAC transfer. And so, he's doing it. But when you think about some of the other top receivers in the North, it doesn't quite match up. 10th is another guy who's carrying a huge load. Tied for 10th is Isaiah Williams at Illinois. He has the second most targets in the North, 38 catches on 57 targets. He has practically twice as many targets as anyone else on the Illinois team. 503 yards is 4th in the North. And again, this is like a Brett Bielema, Luke Altmaier passing attack that isn't scaring anybody, but this guy's still putting up stats.
Yeah, I mean, he is the offense, right? And it's not a particularly good offense, but would Illinois move the ball at all if they didn't have him? I don't know that they would. He hasn't scored yet this year, which is a little odd and maybe makes his inclusion in this conversation a bit strange as well. But I voted for him, and I guess you didn't,
Yep.
or did you?
No,
Yeah,
I did.
you did.
Sure, yeah.
Like, I think like partly as a nod to like as a very few offenses in the North like dominate this conversation about good receivers and good passing attacks. Like there are guys on other teams who are incredibly talented, but are just in dysfunctional systems and aren't getting maybe the shine they deserve because of that.
Yeah, I mean, you think about Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, the guys that we're talking about throwing to a bunch of these other receivers, and that's just not the situation that Isaiah Williams is in. Jalen Polk is in that situation, but he's also has 2 other All-American quality receivers on his team, but Jalen Polk of Washington is tied for 10th for us. He has 3 100-yard receiving games this year. As the third guy at Washington, he's stepped up since Jalen McMillan has been hurt, but he was even good before that, 468 yards, 6th in the North for the third receiver on a team.
Which I think makes it difficult, right, to gauge like exactly like how good are you if you're what a luxury to be the third guy on a team that has that kind of receiver and quarterback firepower. But I thought that about him last year. I guess not that I thought he was bad, but just like let's maybe not include him in the conversation when we're talking about other guys. But I think he's gotten much better this year. I think he's been more productive for them, and it's helped him maybe get some of the recognition that he rightfully deserves because he's had to step up in the absence of Jalen McMillan the last couple of weeks. So yeah, he's really good. He has the 3rd highest PFF grade of any receiver in the North, like of anyone who has significant targets.
So I'm glad we got him on here. We don't have anybody from Colorado, and it's a little hard to figure out who to vote for from Colorado. They had 4 guys have 100 receiving yards in their opener against TCU. Xavier Weaver has 43 catches for 507 yards, which is like tremendous statistically. That's the 3rd most in the North. But they also have Jimmy Horn Jr., 39 catches for 376. And by the way, their best player and best receiver is Travis Hunter, who's been hurt for the last month, basically. So we didn't vote for anybody there. Like Xavier Weaver's the best statistically, but the last 2 games, he has 9 catches for 46 yards combined in the last 2 games. So this is a lot of Shedeur Sanders at quarterback for Colorado. This is a lot of style of play. And I sort of feel bad not having a Colorado guy in there, but I'd want to put Travis Hunter in, and we found a way to get Jalen McMillan in, even though he's been hurt, but Travis Hunter just hasn't played enough, I think, to make this list.
Yeah, I think that's right. I considered Travis Hunter because he's so good. Like when he's healthy, like he's so good. And if we had 15, like we usually do 15 and whittle it down to 10, we did 12 and whittled it down to 10. Like I probably would have had Xavier Weaver on there if I ranked 15.
Yeah. So we acknowledge there's some really good play over there, but sometimes you have so many good players, it's hard to pick one. Okay.
Yep.
Those are our receivers. And again, Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Troy Franklin, Emeka Ibuka, Roman Wilson, and maybe my guy Silas. But at least I think it definitely to Ibuka at 5, and Roman Wilson's been so good this year. I'll take those guys against anybody. Wouldn't you? Like this is elite receiver play.
It is, yeah. And there are tiers, right? I think maybe there's is it after Ibuka? Like I don't know. It's where like if you include the first 5 as tier 1.
I don't know. It's probably maybe a Harrison Odunze tier 1,
and then the other guys,
and then maybe down to Ibuka tier 2, and then Yeah. So something like that. But again, the top guys are as good as they get.
But an Ibuka's ceiling, I think, is to be maybe not exactly in tier 1, but pretty damn close to it, I think.
Yeah. And by the way, Emeka Ibuka is from Washington. Could have gone to Washington. Yeah,
Yep.
that'd be ridiculous. Okay. Fun ranking receivers. Good to see that kind of play again. It's not a 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Top of the country, if it ever was. So like to remind people of that sometimes. Also like to remind people that there is a unqualified person employed as a Big Ten coordinator. We'll do the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show next. All right, time for the Brian Ferentz Survivor Show. We do it every week about the Iowa offensive coordinator. Iowa is averaging 249.2 yards per game. Now, this is a good stat. Last year, Iowa averaged 251.6 yards per game, Landis. That was 130 out of 131 in the FBS top level of college football, right? People know what FBS football bowl subdivision. You're not in the, the FCF playoff stuff like top. Now, so the worst they could have been last year was 131 because there were only 131 teams in it. 2 teams joined FBS this year. So now Iowa can be 132 in the nation in offensive yards per game. Only Sam Houston State is worse. They are coming off a win against Purdue. Deacon Hill, now the starting quarterback for Iowa because Cade McNamara is out for the year, was 6 of 21 for 110 yards. And if anyone doesn't know it, Brian Ferentz is also the quarterback's coach. So 6 of 21 isn't good, but once again, they won. And we're going to get to it later soon. They're going to basically play a game to win the Big Ten West this week. And I don't know what to think.
It's infuriating is what I think of it. They kicked 2 field goals inside the 10-yard line in this game, which like in and of itself should be a fireable offense, even if you're not existing in a world where you're having unqualified son of the head coach coordinating your offense. I don't know, man. They keep winning, but like it doesn't get any less frustrating that this man gets to throw this offense out there and subject all of us to watching it.
It's one of these things where, I mean, like complimentary football, I think some people believe Iowa must play this way in order to succeed. And my main point of all of this is you don't have to be this bad at offense for your defense to be excellent or for your special teams to be very good, which it often is at Iowa. And imagine how good they would be if their offense was just 70th in the nation instead of 132nd or 90th in yards per game. And this is the thing, like if there was a drop-off, Brian Ferentz took over as the offensive coordinator in 2017. That year, they were 117th in the nation in yards per game offensively. The next year, they were 92nd. The next year, they were 99th. The next year in 2020, they were 87th. Like they're getting better. Hey, Bri. Hey, Guy. First year as coordinator. Hey, 117. That's okay. Can only go up from here. The last 3 years, 2021, 121. Last year, they wound up 130, and right now they're 132. So, like, again, I wasn't writing columns to fire the guy when he was in the 90s. The 90s was good enough. Just don't be in the 130s.
What a low bar. What a low bar for success if he can't even get there.
Top 90 offense. Top 90 offense. So there's a thing, statbroadcast.com. Anybody can go look at it. You can look at it. I would suggest it to anybody. You could have it up on your computer while you're watching games on the weekend, and it's great stats there. After a couple days, the great sort of inside analytical stats go away, but the basic, it's the official book of the game. So it's just a great place. All the teams are on there to go dork around if you want to. Statbroadcast.com. So I went to dork around on there to find the Iowa box score, and I typed it in, and it's like they do it for all the sports. So I put in like the day of the most recent Iowa events. Okay. And the first event that came up had a score of Purdue 3, Iowa 0. And I was like, wait, is that the football game? Wait, was the score of the Iowa-Purdue game this weekend 3-0? And it's like, no, that was the women's volleyball match. The score of the football game was 20-14. But that's where we are, where I saw a score that was 3-0, And my first instinct was, that's an Iowa football score. So that's where we are. Kirk Ferentz was asked after the game if they thought about taking Deacon Hill out. Our guy John Steppe asked that question, which is a very reasonable question when you're 6 of 21. And Kirk Ferentz is like, what? What are you talking about? This is a silly question. It's like, okay, if that would be silly, you want to get silly? We can get silly in the postgame, Kirk. So I don't know. We're going to do it in the preview, but humongous Wisconsin game this weekend. And Iowa is right there at 5-1.
I can't believe we're here. I can't believe something needs to change in the sport if that team's getting rewarded for what they're doing.
It is going to change, which is that the Big Ten West isn't going to exist anymore. So I don't know. Okay, so that's where it is. The players are trying. Cooper DeJean, who we talked about, who next time we do a full Knights of the North ranking of the 15 best players in the North, is going to make a strong case at corner to be on that list. Had a pick, returned it to the 5-yard line. They kicked a field goal. I think they went backwards.
It's the Iowa way, baby. That's how they get points.
It was a minus 4-yard drive for a field goal. And Brian's just like, bang, 3 for me. Boom. And then I did see after the debacle at Miami, where they refused to kneel at the end of the game and went fumble, lose the ball, give up a scramble touchdown in the last play of the game. Somebody said, like, even at Iowa, where they're trying to get to 25 points to save the job of the son of the coach, even they kneeled. So I guess a little credit to Iowa for kneeling at the end of that 20-14 win. They weren't trying to get into the end zone to get over 25. So they're still below the 25-point threshold, but we're all below the threshold when it comes to talking about Iowa offense. All right, when we come back, look ahead time, 5 interesting games, and then the game that everybody's going to be watching next on Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis. We'd like to look ahead on Kings of the North every Monday, talk about the games that matter most the coming week for our 28 Northern teams. So it's not just Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State. There's some other interesting games that we want to talk about. And the first one on the list is a Thursday night game, Landis. It's West Virginia, who we have talked about on this show this year. 4-1 at Houston. Houston's 2-3. It's Thursday night on FS1 at 7 p.m. West Virginia on the road is favored by 2.5, and I'm always fascinated. This is Dana Holgorsen, who left West Virginia to go take the job at Houston. But this is like another opportunity for West Virginia to creep closer to bowl eligibility and continue what has been a great start to the season, even if it's been, we're not quite sure how they did it. They've done it.
This is not because I think Houston is a tremendous football team. And in fact, I think Houston has been a bit underwhelming under Dana Holgorsen. They should be a better program than they are. I can't believe West Virginia is favored in any game on the road just because of the way they've been getting by. It's like it's felt untenable for the entire season. But to their credit, they continue to win, and I do think that defense is very good. I think they can certainly keep Houston in check and win this game. And like you said, it would continue. I don't want to call it a resurgent season for Neil Brown because, again, they're not playing particularly good football, but they are winning games, which I suppose is all that matters, especially at West Virginia. I don't think they concern themselves much with how you're winning as long as you're winning, and they are in striking distance of bowl eligibility, which is okay, I think, for this year, but you want to be better than that, but it wouldn't be a bad sort of starting point to get this program back where it should be.
Bowl eligibility of interest in our next game. It's 1-4 Stanford at Colorado. Colorado is 4-2. It's a Friday night game on ESPN at 10 p.m. Colorado at home, favored by 11.5. Coming off a nice win against Arizona State. Colorado won 27-24 after losing to Oregon and USC the previous 2 weeks. This Stanford game, obviously a very winnable game, and then 4 of their last 5 are against currently ranked teams. So if they want to make sure they get to 6 wins, they're going to have to beat Stanford in this game and then beat Arizona at home. But, I mean, I just thought after all the attention that Colorado got for the Oregon blowout and then actually hanging with USC in a pretty good way, which, again, was a lot about USC's bad defense, I thought that was a good team win still without Travis Hunter against Arizona State. And guess what? Like, maybe maybe we're past the phenomenon part of this, but they're just a pretty solid football team trying to get to 5-2.
Yeah, I think and I would probably include us in this, right? Like everyone was super excited about the start of the season for Colorado, when all of us probably got out over our skis a little bit with them without actually, addressing what were clear flaws with this team, flaws that showed up when they played Oregon, and to a lesser extent when they lost to USC, but certainly when they played Oregon, right? This is not a complete football team. This is not a team that belongs in the national conversation, but it's also a team that won one freaking game last year, and Deion's got them turned around and on the cusp of bowl eligibility, which I think is like worth celebrating, right? If you want to make a laughing stock of Deion or feel some type of way about him because he gets a lot of attention, like they've done a pretty good job, I think, getting this program turned around very quickly. And I think there's reason to believe that it will continue to build and get better from here. But you got to win this game. You got to win this game. And I don't even think Arizona's a gimme, because I think Arizona can go blow for blow scoring wise with Colorado, certainly.
Yep.
And I think like Colorado probably wouldn't be favored in that game. I don't think. Maybe they would be. They were done a favor, not a favor, but I think they benefited from the fact that Arizona State is like playing for nothing and was incredibly shorthanded in that game, and they beat them. Good for them. They won a game they should have won. I think it's actually a good test of like where they are, right? Can you go win a game I think you should win against Stanford, and go win a game that is maybe like a toss-up against Arizona, and get this program back to playing some postseason football.
Shadur Sanders, 16 touchdowns, 2 interceptions on the year at quarterback for Colorado. Third game is Iowa State at Cincinnati. I just kind of like this because it's a northern game. It's Saturday at noon on FS1. Cincinnati is a home favorite, favored by 4. Like they're both, again, fighting for bowl eligibility kind of situation. And I think they're similar programs. Like they're the number 2 program in their respective state behind Big Ten teams. They're not, Iowa State's been in the Big 12, but it's always kind of been an outlier in the Big 12. Now Cincinnati's there. We had like the wheel paddle trophy for the Pitt Cincinnati game. I'd be in favor of some kind of Huck Buckhorn, I don't know, kind of trophy. Because like I don't want an Ohio State Iowa trophy. Nobody wants a trophy for playing Iowa. But I'd create something now that Cincinnati and Iowa State are in the same conference. I actually think these are 2 programs that kind of have some things in common.
Yeah, I think you're right. Good win for Iowa State to beat TCU, to take advantage of some miscues from TCU and win that game. I think Cincinnati's on like a little bit of a disappointing run here, like to lose to Miami, Ohio, and then like play Oklahoma tough.
Yeah.
And then come out the next week and I think they could have beaten BYU. And like that wasn't an overwhelming challenge, I think, for Cincinnati. It was out there, right? Maybe that's tough travel, whatever. But I think it's a game that they reasonably could have won, because I don't think BYU is tremendous either. But they lose that game. So I think they need to bounce back here. I think they can definitely win this game. I don't like Iowa State is pretty salty on defense and terrible on offense. I think you'd say the same about Cincinnati, but I think Cincinnati might have a little bit higher of an offensive ceiling if things click for them on a particular day. So if it does for them in this one, I think it would be a nice win for them. And if you look at what they have coming up, like if you get this one, and I think you can beat Baylor at home. I think you can beat UCF at home. And then can you take one on the road at Houston, at West Virginia? Maybe. Those all kind of feel like toss-up games to me. So Cincinnati's season is still in a decent place, despite some disappointing results here early on.
The 4 new teams in the Big 12 this season: BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. They haven't beaten any of the old Big 12 members yet. The only conference win for any of them is BYU against Cincinnati. So this would be an opportunity to get that first win, where the new Big 12 beats the old Big 12. So this is kind of a big one for Cincinnati. Also a big one for Iowa. Iowa at Wisconsin. This is a 4 p.m. kick on Fox. Iowa 5-1, Wisconsin 4-1. Wisconsin is favored by 9.5. And if Wisconsin's favored by 9.5, part of that to me is I'm not sure Iowa can score 10 in this game. But at the same time, I'm a little surprised that Wisconsin's favored by this much. But we have to remember that the only real team that Iowa's played this year, they lost 31-0 to Penn State. They got blown off the field. So, and that's a Penn State offense that we don't think is great. So Wisconsin with Tanner Mordecai and Braylon Allen and what they do, I feel like maybe they're rounding into form a little bit after the Washington State loss. I don't know. Do you think this is close, or Wisconsin decide to tell Kirk Ferentz who owns the West now?
I just don't know if Wisconsin's built to win by that much, even against a team like Iowa, who's not going to score a ton. Like Iowa's defense is good. This is the best defense that Wisconsin will have faced this year, right? Like Washington State is probably the only
Washington.
They just played Rutgers defense is pretty good. I shouldn't discount Rutgers. Rutgers does have a good defense. But this is the best defense that Wisconsin will have played. Like I think like 20 points might win it for Wisconsin, but I don't look at the Badgers as a team that's like ready to roll on offense. I actually think their passing game remains underwhelming, and they're giving the ball to Braylon Allen more, if only because they have no other choice to, because Ches Malusi's out and Braylon Allen's their guy now. But they're not like they scored 24 points last week against Rutgers. Like they're not rocking and rolling on that side of the ball. And I think Tanner Mordecai has been average at best, if not below average, with that passing attack. So I think this is a close game. I think it's a low scoring game. I would pick Wisconsin just because of how anemic Iowa is on offense, but I don't think anyone is rolling in this game. I don't think it's a comfortable one.
Those FEI ratings that we like, Iowa is 120th in offense in those rankings. Wisconsin's 36th. So that's a big gap. I'm intrigued by this because when Kirk Ferentz at Big Ten Media Days in July was asked about Luke Fickell going to this air raid offense, Kirk Ferentz's answer was like, yeah, I'm curious about that, because the clear implication is he doubts it and it's something he would never do. So these programs share Brian, we're going to throw it 45 times a game. Any sentence, actually, any Iowa offensive sentence that begins with Brian is a bad sentence. So the whole point of this is Brian's replacement, comma, we're going to run the air raid. I like, there's so much shared DNA historically with how Iowa and Wisconsin have tried to go about it, and honestly have had pretty good success the last 2-3 decades, right? I mean, honestly, we know that. And Wisconsin, Luke Fickell came in and said, we're going to change. We're going to try to modernize. And Kirk Ferentz said, we're going to nepotize. We're not going to modernize. We're going to keep doing it the old-fashioned way. And here's the collision. Now, it's year one at Wisconsin, and I don't know. But I am fascinated by the collision, because if Iowa wins, Kirk Ferentz is going to go back into his cave and be like, we're never going to try to score, and I'm never firing my son. I don't care about the 25-point thing. Wisconsin tried to evolve, and look what happened. But if Wisconsin wins, maybe it's like one of the final nails in the idea of Iowa wants to play like it's 1940. So I do think there's like a clash of current cultures here that I am really fascinated to watch.
Yeah. It'll be it's a particular brand of football, but if you're into that brand of football, I think it'll be a competitive game.
Last one here in this look ahead is USC at Notre Dame. 6-0 USC. Notre Dame's 5-2 with losses to Ohio State and Louisville. As we said earlier, another primetime game, 7:30 on NBC. And I'm a little surprised by this. As horrible as USC's defense is, Notre Dame is favored. Notre Dame favored by 2.5. What do you think of that line?
I mean, it's reflective of the USC defense. I think is what it is.
Yeah.
No, I'm actually surprised by that too. I still probably would have thought that USC would have been favored in this game, but like Notre Dame's defense is pretty good, right? I think it is a tier below, or maybe 2 tiers below the best defenses in the North, but I still think it's comfortably like a top 25-ish, 30 defense nationally, right? It's a pretty good outfit. And like USC's been messing around, man. Even last week, they scored enough to beat Arizona, but like their offense didn't look great. And I think their offense will have to be clicking on all cylinders in this one to win this game. And it's a fair question, I guess, to ask whether or not they can against what is a decent Notre Dame defense.
In the FEI ratings, again, analytical ratings, rankings. Rankings is people thinking ratings is numbers. Ratings that we like. USC is 7th in offense and 86th in defense. Notre Dame is 20th in offense and 15th in defense.
Yeah.
So that sounds about right. Like you're saying, like talking top 25 defense. We're not talking about like Georgia, Penn State, but we're talking about like a pretty solid defense. I wonder, again, the idea that how much longer can USC tolerate this defense and defensive coordinator Alex Grinch. This would actually be the opportunity. because whatever happens in this game does not affect USC in the Pac-12 race. And with as good as the Pac-12 is, even if USC loses this game, if they run the table in the Pac-12 up, they're in the playoff. Like with wins over Washington and Oregon, and then another team like that in the Pac-12 title game, they'd be in the playoff. If Sam Hartman comes out and throws all over this USC defense, it might be it. So you brought that up early, but it might be an opportunity because if USC is going to lose this one. Because if they lose to Oregon or Washington or somebody like that, that's much more detrimental.
I think Sam Hartman needs that, right? I think he's been a little underwhelming. I know he had a good drive at the end against Duke, but like I don't think he's played his best football in these last 3 games against marquee opponents, which is like sort of the knock on him. So it would be good to see him bounce back for Notre Dame. Is Jaden Greathouse going to play? Do we know that?
I don't know.
Yeah, like he's been out their last 2 games. Like I question their ability to be explosive with their receivers, even if he is available. But that is the one question for me. It's like say he doesn't play, and say Notre Dame's offense is like Audric Estime and Mitchell Evans, who is awesome, by the way. We have, like when we talk about guys who are going to rise up the player rankings, like Mitchell Evans has been incredible, the tight end for Notre Dame. He and Audric Estime and that rushing attack might be enough because USC is not only bad defending the pass, they're also bad defending the run. So I think that could be fine, but I'd feel more comfortable if 1, I knew that Notre Dame was going to have its full complement of receivers, and 2, if they could actually get a little something going to those guys because they really haven't been able to do so yet.
Yeah, Ohio State very specifically took that away. I'm not sure this USC defense can take anything away.
Yeah.
When we come back, we're going to look ahead at the game. Yeah, it's not the game. It's not the game. But it's Oregon-Washington. It's the best game in the history of Oregon and Washington. And it gets its own segment next on Kings of the North. All right, finishing up our look ahead, Landis, with the game that deserves a longer discussion. It's Oregon at Washington. This is a 3:30 kick on ABC. They are getting the big-time crew, Chris Fowler, Kirk Herbstreit, Holly Rowe, and Washington at home is favored by 3. So it's basically a toss-up game. Washington leads this series 61-48-5, but Oregon has won 15 of the last 18. So Oregon smoked them for a decade plus. Washington did win last year in the final seconds. They've been doing this for 123 years. This will be the 115th game, and it's the first time they're both ranked in the top 10 of the AP poll, Landis. I don't think we can underestimate how huge this game is. The winner becomes the favorite in the Pac-12. The winner becomes the favorite to get a playoff berth, and I think either of these teams in a wide open year is capable of winning the national championship. But that road starts here. I don't think the loser is out because the one-loss loser, if they don't trip up again, would be in the Pac-12 championship game with a shot at revenge, potentially. But what it does for the winner is gigantic. I'm so psyched for this game.
Yeah, I think there's also, too, like, neither one of these teams, I think, gets to live comfortably after this game, right? There are other landmines within the Pac-12. So, like, even that, that doesn't guarantee, like, the winners in, doesn't guarantee the losers out, because I think, like, the winner could go on to lose 2 more games, perhaps, the way the Pac-12 is set up here. So, it's a monster. It's a monster game. I kind of wish it was at night. It's a little, like, I wasn't as bummed out about these big games being more during the daytime when they initially started. And maybe it's because I cover Ohio State on a day-to-day basis and have just seen too many of these games move to a less than atmosphere. But like, this game needs to be prime time under the lights. Everybody sauced up and ready to roll out in Seattle.
Yeah, that'd be fun. I don't know. 3:30 games used to be the spot, man. Like right?
But it's noon out there. It's earlier
No,
out there.
You just want the people in the in the Northwest to be drunk? Is that your main gripe here? They're not going to be drunk enough?
I want, like, this is an opportunity, I think, for like 2 great Northern football teams to play a absolute banger of a game. And I think it can be that if you play it at 9:00 in the morning on the moon, right? But it could, the maximized version of this is like putting it in the prime time stage, and it doesn't take any shine off the game for me. I wish it was there.
Last year, Washington won in the final seconds, And so many people are back from that game. Michael Penix and Bo Nix. Also, I think this is the first matchup ever. Well, it was last year at least. But the first quarterback matchup ever where one quarterback's entire last name resides within the last name of the opposing quarterback.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah. Ruminate on that. So Bo Nix last year, 19 of 28 for 280 yards, 2 touchdowns. Michael Penix, 26 of 35 for 408, 2 touchdowns and a pick. Last year, Oregon, 592 yards. Washington, 522 yards. So over 1,000. I think we'll get over 1,000 again in this one. Last year, Michael Penix threw a 62-yard touchdown with 3 minutes left to put Washington ahead. To tie the game, to tie it for Washington. Oregon went for it on 4th and 1 from their own 34 with a minute and a half left, and the running back slipped on the handoff. Goes down. Washington gets the ball back, kicks a field goal, a 43-yard field goal with like 50 seconds left to go ahead. And then Oregon's driving for a tying field goal. Troy Franklin, our guy that we talked about, makes a catch at the 22-yard line with 1 second left and goes out of bounds. Would have set up a game-tying 39-yard field goal attempt, but he stepped out of bounds on the route and was called for illegal touching. So they wound up trying to throw a Hail Mary that didn't work. So this went down to the wire in the best possible way last year, Landis. Let me give you some stats about this year. And it fits, I think, what we talked about in the discussion about flaws. Points per game this year, Oregon is second in the nation at 51.6. Washington's third at 46 points per game. So again, I think we're looking at 1,000 yards, potentially, and 100 points in this game. Yards per game, Washington's first, 569. Oregon second, 554. FEI rating, offense, Washington 1, Oregon 5. So Washington rated better offensively. Defense, Oregon 17, Washington 33. So the defensive units, both not as good, clearly. Both offense-first teams. But I do think Oregon's defense is better. I don't know that anybody would dispute that right now. So I do think this comes down to, can the relentless Washington offense with Roma Dunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan back just absolutely outscore Oregon? Because I'm not sure Washington's going to stop Oregon.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am. I think that makes the start really important for Washington. Like, can you get out and not necessarily can you get up early, but can you put Oregon's defense on its heels early? And if it's a back and forth shootout, then I certainly like Washington's ability to do that. If it's a situation where Washington really has to work the ball down the field, maybe not dissimilar from how they had to do a couple weeks ago against Arizona. Or was it? I keep getting those games mixed up. Which was the game where they
Arizona?
had to run the ball?
No,
Right?
Arizona played Washington pretty tight within one score, and then Arizona also came out and took USC to triple overtime. So Arizona's a pain.
Yeah, but that was put an umbrella over the Washington offense, make them show they can work the ball down the field without throwing it over heads. If Oregon can do that, then I guess I get a little bit worried, but I don't know that they can. I guess we'll see. If I say to you, I think Oregon is the much more physical football team in this game, I guess, one, do you agree with that? And two, then how much does that matter?
I think I probably agree. I think I would agree. But can a downfield passing attack be physical? Because this feels like that's what it feels like to me. Because sometimes I feel like an air raid passing offense can kind of feel light and fluffy. And this feels like a sledgehammer to me. And it's just rip contested catch, rip post, rip crossing route, bang, bang, bang. So I think there's a physicality to the way Washington throws the ball that counteracts maybe their lack of traditional physicality in a game like this, because I do think Washington has a chance to just wear on Oregon because the passing attack is so Penix is a physical quarterback. He throws downhill to me. It feels like he's coming at you. Even when he's going over you, he's coming at you. And so I think in that way, I'm less concerned about Oregon having a traditional physical edge.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's almost hard to put into words, right? But I think I agree with you. There's like a the assertiveness with which like Washington operates its passing attack, which is like we don't care. Like we're gonna bomb it on you and keep
Yeah.
bombing it on you and keep bombing it on you. There is something about that that does like feel I don't know if physical is the right word for it, but it is. It's just like it's an onslaught, and they
Yes.
don't and they don't care like what the state of the game is, who's up, who's down, how things have transpired. They're just going to keep doing it. And I do think there is an element of that that can wear on a defense over time. So like even if it's not rocking and rolling in the beginning, and like Oregon comes out with a good plan, then Washington has to counter to that. I still think like in the back of your mind, if you're any defense playing Washington, you're just like, all right, when's it going to come? When is bombs away time? Because you know they're not going to stop doing it. And I think that is in a weird way like it's an attribute of Washington that is hard to quantify, but I think certainly exists.
And I don't feel Oregon's offense is the same way, right? We've talked a lot about ADOT, average depth of target. Michael Penix, 11 yards per pass, depth of target. He's throwing it 11 yards down the field on his average throw. Bo Nix is 6.4. It's practically double.
Yeah.
It is sledgehammer versus 1,000 cuts, and both are tremendously effective. Michael Penix this year, 134 of 179, 2,004 passing yards, 16 touchdowns, 2 picks. Bo Nix, 128 of 160, 1,405 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, 1 pick. I think Washington's going to win because I think that onslaught, I don't think Oregon's going to stop that. And I just think Oregon, with the 1,000 cuts, just has to piece it together a little bit more. And it might not even be Washington stopping Oregon. But I think Oregon is more susceptible, like, oh, a drop on 3rd and 7. Oh my gosh, it hit the guy right in the numbers. He hasn't dropped the pass all year. Now Oregon's got a punt. And I just think like Washington's just like 30-yard pass, 30-yard pass, 30-yard pass. And in that matchup, I'll take the sledgehammer over the paper cuts, even if maybe traditionally Oregon is a more balanced team in a lot of ways. And by the way, like not much of a running attack for Washington. Bucky Irving in the backfield for Oregon is a dude, man. He is dynamic.
Oregon's offensive line is really good too. We don't talk about that unit a whole lot. I think they're really good, and I think Washington's defensive line, as I mentioned earlier, has it's not bad, and like certainly they're capable of flipping a switch and I think being excellent. But I don't know that they've been that to this point this year. So like I would worry a little bit about like Oregon just saying, you know what, we're going to smash it. Like we have the offensive line to run the ball and keep the ball away from Washington's offense enough to like keep us within striking distance. Or like even if Washington scores every time it has the ball, but it only has the ball 7 times because of Oregon playing ball control. Like I think that's on the table. Oregon rushed for 300 yards against Washington in this game last year. I think they're definitely capable of doing that this year. And I think that's probably the method, or that's the path to victory for Oregon, I think, is maybe slowing it down a little bit and really relying on that offensive line and less on Bo Nix. Like Bo Nix is a complement to your offensive line and your rushing attack in this game, and that's how you win. Because I think if you try to go throw for throw with them, I like Washington in that game. But I don't think if you turn this into like you can't turn it into like a man ball on both sides. Like I don't think Washington's going to get dragged into that game because it's not their strength. But I do think that Oregon is much more equipped to get this to a game state that favors them via a physical rushing attack than Washington is.
I'll take a Washington victory, maybe on a final drive game
Yeah.
in the 40s, maybe something like 49-45. Michael Penix throws the game-winning touchdown with 45 seconds left, something like that. I guess if I'm betting it, I would take Washington -3. What would you take here on a Monday?
I it's tough, man. Like I it's hard with Oregon because as we said, like we think they're really good, like really balanced on both sides of the ball, but it's hard to really wrap your arms around that because the schedule just hasn't shown us enough to believe that that's true. But I'm probably going to err on that side. I will take the physicality of Oregon, I think, in this game. I agree with you. I think it's tight. I think it might come down to the last possession. Maybe it's similar to last year, but Oregon makes that last play instead of stepping out of bounds and not getting the opportunity to kick that field goal. So I'll take the Ducks in a 1-score game.
All right. We don't always do picks on Monday, but sometimes you gotta. And it's just the first of many big Northern games to come. We hope you guys will be with us for all of those games here on Kings of the North. We're doing it Northern football style, man, and we're like developing what that style is. But if you've listened a couple times, I hope you're getting a feel for it. We continue to get a feel for it ourselves, and we just so happen to have some pretty dang good football to talk about here. So that's not going to change for now. Appreciate our guy, Mike Urostowski, our producer, making everything look good, making everything sound good, helping us getting organized, elevating this show in every way. We'll be back on Kings of the North next Monday. We'll have Kings of Columbus talking all about Ohio State on Wednesday. For now, for Bill Landis, I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.